what's up everyone? It's Emily and welcome back to my channel. So I did a poll over on my Instagram story a couple days ago and I asked you all what you wanted me to do a rec video on. And I asked if you wanted it to be asexual, aromantic representation or neurodivergent representation, and neurodivergent representation won, so I will be releasing this video first. But don't worry, I will be doing a video on ace representation as well. So for this video, I did some research and found some really interesting sounding books with neurodivergent main characters. As per usual with these videos, I have to disclaim that I have not read most or any of these books. And it's important that you do your own research and check your triggers before reading anything. Down below, I also will have links to other resources to find some more books that I did not mention on this list. So first, let's talk about what is neurodivergence. Well, it's someone who is not neurotypical, and this can manifest itself in different ways. The two most common things that people think of when we talk about neurodivergence are ASD, which is the autism spectrum disorder, and ADHD. The hardest thing about finding a lot of books that weren't written super recently is a lot of the terminology is outdated, and if the person who's writing the book isn't neurodivergent themselves, it can be really hard to write a genuine character who is neurodivergent. I did run into that a lot, so I do think it's important to keep looking and keep especially looking for authors who are neurodivergent if you're looking for true and accurate representation. But on top of that, it's good to remember that everyone is completely different and everyone's brains work a little bit differently anyway. So when looking for representation, just keep that in mind. Also, everyone's experience is going to be vastly different, and it's good to think about that when thinking about reading books from another person's point of view. But yes, being neurodivergent. So a lot of people think of autism or ADHD when they think of someone who's neurodivergent, but on a lot of lists, you'll also find people who are diagnosed with PTSD, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, OCD. Any of these things are also technically linked to being neurodivergent. For the sake of narrowing this down, I decided to keep my list to mainly autism and ADHD. And with this, there's a lot of queer rep and other disabilities mentioned in this as well. But like I said, please do your own research and check your triggers. I think a few of these books have some heavier topics that may not be suitable for everyone to read. Most of them are YA and a couple are new adult/adult fantasy sci-fi. So the first book I want to recommend that I'm really looking forward to reading is called Queens of Geek by Jen Wild. And Jen Wild is an autistic person who is also diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. So what really drew me to this book is the fact that it's kind of geeky and Comic-Con related. Our main character, Taylor, is an anxious person who is autistic, and along with her friend Charlie, they are going to travel from Australia to the US for a kind of Comic-Con. They call it SuperCon. And along this trip, she has to deal with panic attacks amongst many other difficulties in being in large groups of people. But the story isn't just about her being autistic, it also just has its own plot, but her experiencing her autism in this setting is interwoven into the plot. So it's a YA book that is perfect for people who love Comic-Con, cosplay, geeky things, and those are all things like right up my alley. So this is one that I definitely put on my TBR because it sounds so good, and I love the fact that it also has some autistic and neurodivergent representation as well. The next one I want to talk about is another YA kind of coming of age, finding yourself story called State of Grace by Rachel Lucas. Our main character, Grace, has autism and also an auditory processing disorder, which is something that happens a lot with people who are neurodivergent. Basically, it's described as like you see someone talking and you don't really understand what they're saying while they're speaking, and it just takes a while to process. I mean, it's an auditory processing disorder. This book also has a character that is not the main character, it's another side character who also has ADHD, but I do want to point out that I think this book has some outdated verbiage. It uses the term Asperger's, which is still used commonly, but it's now kind of seen as an outdated term, along with things like high functioning autism and things like that. I read on Rachel's website or in an interview with her that her child has autism, but I don't know if Rachel herself has been diagnosed or has looked into that at all. So I can't tell you if this is only based on what she's experienced with her child or if it's based on her own life. But it is another story of a teenage girl who has autism, who is just trying to fit in, and I think we can definitely use more of those. So this is another one that I think I would be interested in reading. Not as much probably as Queens of Geek, but definitely sounds like it could be a good read. The next book I want to talk about is Failure to Communicate by Kaya Sonderby. This is an adult sci-fi novel with a bi-autistic main character. Now, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around what this book is really about, but from my understanding, the main character is one of the last people in the world with autism, and she has to use her communication skills to communicate between different alien species and the struggles that come along with that. And apparently it's supposed to be like very like space political, which sounds kind of interesting. It also says that there's polyamorous representation in here as well. So it just sounded like something really different and interesting from a lot of the sci-fi that people read. They're kind of flipping the stereotype on the head that autistic people are really bad at communicating, yet this seems to be the only person who can communicate with them. So I thought that was really cool and an interesting twist, and I would be excited to hear what people have to say about this. The next book I want to talk about is called Baker Thief, and this one is a Quebec-inspired urban fantasy novel. It says that it's supposed to be kind of like a hate to lovers, enemy to lovers sort of trope fantasy, where it's a dual perspective and like one person is investigating another person who stole something from her. But it says that it's with an aromantic spin on that, so I'm not 100% sure what that means. I don't know if that means that like they like each other but in an aromantic way, which is totally awesome, and I would be really interested to see how they write that, because I have never heard of a book really doing that. So I love when authors take a trope or a stereotype and flip it on their head. And it also partially takes place in a croissant like bakery place, which you cannot go wrong with bakery settings. And also political conspiracies, which I think is so funny that you have a book that has croissants and political government conspiracies like in one. Like, what could be better than that? It also kind of sounds like it's supposed to be like a mystery thriller, and I couldn't find where exactly the neurodivergent representation is. I assume it's in one of the two main characters' POVs that we see, but it sounds really interesting and very different. Okay, so this next one sounds so different and incredible. Like, I'm so glad I found it. It just sounds so wild. And okay, so it's called Downfall, and it's a choose your own adventure interactive romance. Now, listen, I know what you're thinking. Emily, have you not learned from My Lady's Choosing how horrible these books can be? And the answer is apparently not. Side note, the author, Roanna Silver, is neurodivergent, disabled, and queer, so I thought that was really cool, and this is definitely one where the author is writing representation of themselves, which is awesome. It is over 200,000 words long. Just to like give you a reference, like most adult fiction, I believe, like even fantasy, stays under 150,000 words. So like I can only imagine like how thick this book must be. It sounds crazy. Here, I have it pulled up because I think I need to read off like what's in this book. So what happens when you find there's not just 2 dimensions to save, but 3? Is saving 2 worlds worth sacrificing 1? Will you find love with the crew of the Downfall, or will you bring these pirates to justice? Are connections between universes, people, and lives meant to be forged and protected, or severed for the greater good? You can play as a male, female, non-binary, or agender, gay, straight, bisexual, asexual, or aromantic. You can play as a monogamous or polyamorous, romancing up to 5 crewmates at the same time. Live your best life as a star-covered space elf or as a feathered magical bird person. Face off against infamous pirates known as the Ghost Queen or join her rebellious quest. Save not 1, but 3 whole worlds, or one built on magic, 1 on technology, and 1 on something entirely unknown. Explore an ever-shifting magical pirate ship and open portals between dimensions with magic, technology, or the power of rock and roll. Oh my gosh, I don't know. It just sounds so out of this world, pun intended. And it's a choose your own like choice story, which it just sounds so awesome. And I truly wonder, I mean, that has to be why it's over 200,000 words. Like, how do you even write that? Like, I don't even know. I don't even think I have the capability to like imagine how I do it. Like, wow, this book, it just sounds so different than everything else, right? And like interactive stories can be so hit or miss. And obviously My Lady's Choosing for me was a miss. If you don't know what I'm talking about, the live stream is on my page. Just go find it. It was a mess. One of the few books I DNF'd in 2021. Honestly, like, it just sounds so crazy, so different, so interesting, and apparently at least one of the characters is neurodivergent, so like, I just need somebody to read this and then tell me everything. The next book I want to talk about is called Lake Lore, and this one actually came out in March of 2022, so this is still a fairly recent release, and the book features two main characters who are both non-binary and neurodivergent. It is about two teenagers who like find themselves under a lake, I guess. There is a magical world that is beneath the one in which we currently live, and they kind of get pulled into it somehow. But mixed in with that, the relationship between these two characters is very severed. They haven't spoken to each other in many years, and now they have to work together to save themselves and each other. I don't know, it just sounds really interesting, and I'm always down for like a YA fantasy novel that brings up these like really tough topics. It sounds like this one is a little bit like heavier on the heart, and like I think that's important, and it's important that we have that in young adult books as well. And I'm very fascinated with how this magical world works and how they get there, and how the writer portrays it. And it just sounds really interesting, and to have two broken people who have to help each other and learn to trust each other again. It just sounds really moving and touching, and it's definitely one that has like been moved onto my TBR like immediately after I saw it. So yeah, this one sounds really awesome. The next book I want to talk about is called Fresh. It's written by Margot Wood, and Margot has ADHD along with our main character, who is also bi, and this book also features a very large cast of LGBT characters. And this kind of seems like it's teeter-tottering on that whole YA to new adult kind of genre that people are creating, which is amazing. It's about a girl named Elliot who's going into her freshman year of college thinking it's going to be one thing, and then it kind of turns out to be something else. And a lot of people have talked about that this can be a little bit triggering, so definitely if you're looking at reading this one, and probably Lake Lore as well, like definitely look up the triggers for those. It sounds like this is a very brutal, raw coming-of-age story of like what it's like to leave home, your parents, everything you know, and be kind of thrust into this completely new environment away from everything that you have ever known, and how life kind of subverts expectations a lot. This one I kind of want to read because it just sounds like it would be a really moving story, and I'm really interested to see how Margot portrays the thoughts of a character with ADHD. I also hear that they break the fourth wall a lot, and there are tons of footnotes, and that the author actually did that as a way to help manifest the ADHD. And I don't know, I'm so fascinated with that concept, and I really want to read it because I'm curious how that reads and how that would affect me as a reader. And yeah, it just sounds very, very interesting and different. The last book on my list today is called An Unkindness of Ghosts by Rivers Solomon. So this is another sci-fi adult book with lots of diversity and autistic characters. I think the best way because it's sci-fi, and sci-fi can be kind of hard to put it very simply, I think the best thing for me to do is probably read the little thing that they have on Goodreads for it, so I'm gonna do that now. Odd-mannered, obsessive, withdrawn Aster has little to offer folks in the way of rebuttal when they call her ogre and freak. She's used to the names, she only wishes there were more truth to them. If she were truly a monster as they accused, she'd be powerful enough to tear down the walls around her until nothing remained of the world, save for stories told around the cook fire. Astor lives in the low-deck slums of the HSS Matilda, a U.S. vessel organized much like the antebellum South. For generations, the Matilda has ferried the last of humanity to a mythical promised land. On its way, the ship's leaders have imposed harsh moral restrictions and deep indignities on dark-skinned sharecroppers like Astor, who they consider to be less than human. When the autopsy of Matilda's sovereign reveals a surprising link between his death and her mother's suicide some quarter-century before, Astor retraces her mother's footsteps. Embroiled in a grudge with a brutal overseer and sowing the seeds of civil war, Astor learns there may be a way off the ship if she's willing to fight for it. So there's definitely some links there to racial inequalities that they're taking from. So definitely please check your triggers and anything if you decide to read this book. I thought it was very poignant. I read a couple reviews on it as well, including one by With Cindy, who I really enjoy her videos. And I always love to hear what Cindy has to say about what she reads. And her review for this was really compelling. And she said that, it's super diverse, but not just for diversity's sake, that, every character was put in there for a reason and that it only adds to the story. And so because of that, I really think that this would be an awesome book to pick up. And I think that it touches on a lot of subjects that we don't get to hear about a lot, especially in a sci-fi setting. And these stories are important and need to be told. So those are all of the neurodivergent character books that I have to recommend to you all today. I hope that you were able to find something that interested you that maybe you would be willing to pick up. If you have any more recommendations, feel free to comment them down below. And if you plan on reading any of these books, please let me know. I would love to hear everyone's thoughts on them, if you have read them or if you're looking at reading it. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to my channel, and I cannot wait to see you in the next one.